got something like 55.
Hi, I'm Stephen Carson, coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri, in these United States. Let's see, we're going to do an Econ Minis today. You probably already know the main story, but we're going to start with a little interesting news from our guest's home country. Something that's part of it's particularly interesting to me. Shill stuff. Just subscribe star support has been really important to me. Thank you. Most people who support the channel through that do $5 a month, so really cheap. But man, you get enough people doing that, and it starts to really make a difference. So thanks for that support for this show, for the Radical Liberation show, which oscillates between Econ Minis and sort of history and political theory and so forth, back and forth each week, every other week, as well as the Mrs. Radlib show, which is only about once a month, but people seem to particularly like that. We're working on trying to put another one together for hopefully this Saturday. Also, wanted to mention Mad Mercenary, reminding me in my mind. We have the book cover contest. Every year at the end of the year, we judge a contest. This year, it's really cool. You design a book cover. Somebody said, "Is it okay? I did the whole sleeve. Like you open it up and there's something on the inside of the left and the front cover and the inside back cover, and there's the back cover and the spine and the front." Anyway, I don't know that you need to take it that far. Just the cover is okay as well. Um, and then okay, so that's all that kind of stuff. Welcome to Black Horse, and I guess it's worth emphasizing that you're from Canada, Black Horse, because that's
Yes, I
relevant.
am from the Great White North, born and raised. So,
Right.
um,
And so you had a couple things you wanted to highlight that are going on there. First of all, little distracted. I had to share this with my wife and daughter. The little footage you showed me where there's some kind of hearing going on or something, and a guy
yeah. So
collapses in the middle of it.
this is the Emergencies Act inquiry. You might remember the last time we talked about Canada on this broadcast. We were in the middle of invoking what used to be called the War Measures Act, so
Mm-hmm.
that we could,
Stop the
randomly
truckers.
arrest a bunch. Yes, arrest
Yeah.
arrest the truckers, all of
Right.
this stuff, and I I guess it's almost a year later. We now have an inquiry into why it was necessary to invoke the Emergencies Act, and in the middle of this inquiry, well, you can show the footage if you'd like.
Oh, I don't think I'm set up for that. Sorry. Uh,
Anyways,
what
in
I
the middle
might
of the
do,
inquiry
I'll
on
share the
national
link.
television,
Yeah.
yeah, in the middle of the inquiry on national television, one of the lawyers just like keels over. So,
Jeez.
Canada's in great shape.
Um, yeah, so we'll just leave that collapsing guy, poor collapsing guy, to the side for the moment. I'll just say I've seen a lot of videos like that. And of course, these are the people who happen to collapse when the camera's on them. I assume there might be a few people collapsing that don't happen to have a camera on them at the time, right?
Yeah,
So, just a
I'll
guess.
just leave it at I've never seen somebody just collapse like that on national television before. It's
I don't remember anything like that growing up, I have to say.
there have been some weird moments in the last year. The Fetterman Oz debate was definitely a weird moment. This was
Mm-hmm.
definitely a weird moment.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Is that debate over the um, extraordinary measures they took? Is that one of the things you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, so it's worth
Okay.
kind of reviewing what happened as a consequence of the Emergencies Act, the truck protest, all the rest of it. So, as people who have kind of followed the show and followed me on Twitter will know, uh, the Canadian government went and arrested all of these people. Gave them a pretty tough time. A lot of the organizers were put in prison without bail for extended periods of time. Um, the usual kind of rough ride stuff that you can do with people who have committed minor crimes, but the prosecution is extremely motivated to make life difficult for them.
Yeah.
Uh, but a number of other things have happened in Canada that are, and so, but the the protest itself was quite successful in along kind of limited grounds. It successfully recaptured the political infrastructure of the Western elite. So if we think back to
Mm-hmm.
the moment of the truck protests on this channel, we outlined how the truck protests were kind of foot soldiers for a Western elite that is dominated, that is in conflict with the Laurentian elite that sort of uh, dominate the governance of this country and have for quite some time.
And
That Western elite.
I noticed by the
Go ahead.
way that when you laid out, I think three elites, right?
Yes.
You didn't. I'm trying to remember. I don't think you particularly said like these elites are our guys, these guys are not, and you weren't necessarily aligning yourself with any of these elites exactly, right?
No, I would argue that none of these elites represent me particularly.
That's kind of what I figured. Yeah.
But the Western elite successfully removed all of the, in the US, you guys would call them rhinos, all of
Hmm.
the false representation that existed for them in the political system. They got a new leader for the Conservative Party at the national level. They got a set of new leaders in three provinces for the Conservative parties that represent those that represent the Western provinces. Um, they have then proceeded to go ahead and remove from power a whole series of administrative officials, including the hated health administrator in Alberta who put two pastors in jail, or who was instrumental in putting two pastors in jail for opening their churches during COVID. Um, and the new Alberta government is proposing prosecuting certain elements of the COVID regime. Um, so going through the police force and purging people, that kind of stuff. So a proper circulation of the local elites out there.
Ah,
So uh, the truck protest was not successful really in changing federal politics in Canada, but it has dramatically changed politics in the western part of the country. Um, so that's big news. But the other thing that is big news is that there is a crisis of federal authority going on in Canada, and it's something that you guys would recognize from the United States quite well. And so I thought we'd take a few minutes to address it. So in the US, you guys have had nullification for quite some time. Tom Woods famously published a book on this. It's got a long history. In Canada, nullification has not been a thing for a very, very long time. We had kind of a similar transition from a soft federalist system at the beginning of the country to a much harder federal system with the central government using money as a lever over all of the subsidiary governments,
yeah, we're
really
familiar with that. But
really
man,
from the time of Trudeau Senior, up until well, really up until quite
so
recently.
you're talking about the
Uh,
60s would be the when you would
yeah,
start
so
that clock? Okay, well that's a hundred
in the
years
60s and
after. That's
70s.
100 years after it started here, because of course, in the United States, it started with Lincoln in the 1860s,
Yeah.
right?
So you guys had a much more dramatic confrontation over it.
Yeah,
In Canada, what happened basically is as soon as there was a welfare state in sort of beginning in 1950 and culminating about 1970, um, the federal government wielded its promise of dollars to support the welfare state as a tool to erode sort of regional autonomy. Um, but this dynamic has changed quite a bit in recent years, um, beginning with kind of three events. First, there was the sovereign debt crisis in Canada in the early 90s that was resolved in the mid 90s through to about 2005 by radically reducing the number of dollars that the federal government passed to the provincial governments. And as a consequence, they really eroded the levers of power that they held over provincial governments.
gotcha.
Um, this reduced level of power first began to be tested by Quebec, who have systematically ignored federal human rights legislation for 5+ years in order to enforce their cultural priorities. So, for those of you who don't know, Quebec is uh, a province that is both politically and demographically dominated by French Canadians. Um, and French Canadians have a strong sort of um, almost ethno-nationalist framework for
Yeah,
their political thinking.
that's exactly what I was
You
going to say. I was going to say, would it be too far to say Quebec? Go too far to say Quebec's kind of like an ethno state,
Yes, but it's not a state, so it's hard to say that, right?
right? Right, an ethno
Uh,
region, something like
yes.
that.
So most recently, there's a new set of language laws that they introduced in this year that um, subject all businesses larger than 25 employees to some quite stringent mandates to make sure that a large enough proportion of their employees are francophones, a large enough proportion of the things that they do are done in French, all of this stuff. Um, you know, a large enough number of their board members are francophones, etc. And all of this language is kind of a stand-in for race in Quebec. So this is kind of a systematic effort to make sure that French Canadians are in positions of power in all of the institutions in
But
Quebec.
by the way, you probably wouldn't know, but in Mises's book on nationalism, nation state and economy, his
Yep.
own view, and other people have other views who have studied the topic, but his own view is that it's all about language. Um, and he talked about how the say a dominant majority with a different language than a minority there'll be a big tussle over what language is used in the government schools, for example.
Yeah. Well, there
Right.
was.
So he wrote this 100 years ago, and probably if you read it, you'd be nodding your head all the way through, thinking about what happened in Quebec later.
Yeah. I mean, Quebec. The local elite in Quebec, really going back to the Quiet Revolution, and even before that, at when it was dominated by by the Catholic Church, have always had this view going back to when the colony was captured in like the whatever it is, the 18th century. So there's a long history there. So, maybe if we said that there were just problems with nullification in Quebec, maybe that wouldn't be so unusual for Canada. But there
Right.
have been two rather dramatic things that have happened in the last couple of months. Um, and we'll highlight them first with the kind of, we'll bury the lead until last. So the next thing that we're going to know here is that the Ontario government, Ontario is the largest population center, kind of this um, kind of the B part of power for the Laurentian elite. But
Right.
there's sort of long-standing dislike between the formal government of Ontario and the government of Canada, um, just feuding over all sorts of things. Anyways, they've decided that they're going to invoke the notwithstanding clause in order to bypass the federal labor courts, to send a bunch of school janitors back to work so that the schools can't be closed, so that Doug Ford's political prospects can be better. So this is the first time that the provincial notwithstanding clause has ever been invoked um, in sort of while being expressly condemned by the federal government. Um, the for those of you not familiar with Canadian law, the provincial notwithstanding clause uh, is it's an end run around the Constitution. It's an argument. It's a legal clause where if the government decides that there's like a compelling state interest, they can just ignore whatever else is in the Constitution. In this case, the provisions around labor.
Right. And
Uh,
so just elite theory lens real quick here, which is that um, one perspective would be, well, the notwithstanding clause is there, and so it can be used. You know, did
yeah.
did what de jure is de facto, right? What is officially on the books are the rules of the game. But clearly nobody believes that, because we have something called the test case. What is a test case? A test
Yeah.
case is when you take something that's been written down on paper and you actually try to use it in real life. And then somebody challenges it, and then you find out if this is really going to fly in real life, as opposed
Yes.
to being interpreted away, just somebody saying, no, we're not going to do that. I don't care what it says on the piece of paper, right? And so
And
that's the point you're at with here, right?
right at the moment, we have this confrontation between the federal government and the provincial government over whether or not the provincial government can actually ignore federal law in this way.
Right.
Um, and And
And by the way,
this,
just to draw quick parallels, we've seen a lot of this sort of thing happening actually in the United States with marijuana, for example,
yep,
where
yeah,
the
that's what I
states,
say.
the federal government says marijuana is illegal, and the state government says not here, it isn't, and they've been getting
Well,
away with it, right?
in the US, there's been nullification on both sides for quite a while. Nullification in sanctuary cities are probably the most
Yes.
clear cut example of nullification, especially because in the world of sanctuary cities, you actually have troops on both sides, right? You have
Wow.
ICE, which is kind of you can almost think of it as an army charged with enforcing immigration law,
Right.
and then you
Federal.
have
ICE would be federal. Federal
yes,
immigration enforcement.
and
Yeah.
then you have the police forces of all these local states who actively say ICE can't enforce federal immigration law in the city and county of LA, for example.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's very much the situation you have playing out for the first time in Ontario, where you have um, the where you have the the unions who are now striking in sympathy with these school janitors, saying you can't declare our strike illegal, and you have the OPP whose job it is formally to go around and ticket all these people. And uh, I think the fine is like $20,000 a day for an illegal strike per
Ooh.
person striking.
Ooh.
So I don't know how many janitors there are in Ontario schools, but I'm sure it's a lot. So
Yeah.
uh, so we'll see what happens. But it's in escalation in the collapse of authority of the central government. And then
Right.
last, out in Alberta, where we've talked a little bit about the politics out there, you might imagine, based on that background, that they'd be at odds with the Trudeau government. Um, there's another sort of flashpoint of the culture war here in Canada, where the Trudeau government has uh, banned the sale of all handguns, basically everything except sort of single shot long rifles.
Okay.
Um, and
So
you
I'm sorry,
have
federal gun ban all over Canada
fe-
in theory?
federal government federal gun ban all over Canada is supposed to take
Wow.
effect this fall.
Oh, and by the way, I don't know if you would even know this, but I was reading some gun control stuff, and they mentioned that actually Canada was much better on gun rights longer than the United States. And then,
Yeah,
but then
it's a con-
once it turned, it like got worse than the United States fast. At least what was on the books.
yeah, it's a complicated issue because um, so, like, to give you an example of the way Canada was in the 1940s, the Canadian government thought it was perfectly reasonable to hand rifles to German POWs so they could go hunting on the weekend. So, uh, a very different kind of attitude then. But what you've never had in Canada that you've had in the US forever is this concept of self defense law. So in Canada, for a very
Uh,
long time, you had the right to have a firearm, but if someone broke into your home or like tried to rape you or something, and you shot them with it, you're completely screwed. Um,
and you're
you
saying this
don't.
goes back, what do you mean, pre-World War II?
This goes back at least to the 70s.
Okay, okay.
Um,
That I can believe.
I,
Yeah.
I don't know what what self defense law was like in sort of British North America, Canada, but uh, ever since the progressive era in Canada began, it has been functionally illegal to defend yourself in Canada. So have a whether you can own a firearm or not is kind of irrelevant if the minute that you use it in self defense, you're facing like the total destruction of your life,
Right.
which I actually think is the much greater threat to gun rights in the United States than actual bans on guns. Um, it would be very hard to institute a ban
Yeah.
on guns
You
almost
can,
anywhere in the
right.
U.S.
You can have the gun, but if you use it, basically, we will make you so hesitant to use it that you'll allow yourself to be in danger rather than end up in court over your
That's right.
self-defense
The
choice.
Rittenhouse
Yeah.
case is like the peak of this.
Yeah.
You have a person who uses a firearm in the most conservative possible self defense uh, way,
Right.
and yet they still went to the very brink of having their life destroyed.
Yeah.
Um, in Canada, the Rittenhouse case is a open and shut case. The guy's going to prison for the remainder of their natural life.
Right. Right.
Anyways, back on the situation in question, four of the provinces, or three of the provinces and one of the territories in Canada, have told the federal government, no, we're not going to ban the sale of handguns. Um,
Ah, wait, I'm sorry. Say those numbers again. How many provinces? Out of how many?
Three provinces and one territory.
Out
So
of
same
out
group,
of
same Western. Out of
out of
10
how many?
provinces, three territories.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha.
So roughly a third of the country geographically, maybe about 25% of the country by population.
Saying no way. Ain't happening.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So this has been an interesting sort of conflict. Trudeau is of the position that he's going to go ahead anyway,
Mm-hmm.
which has led to the emergence of something called the Alberta Sovereignty Act. Alberta is kind of the center of the Western elite in Canada, and the
Mm-hmm.
Alberta Sovereignty Act says that if the Alberta provincial government uh, votes together that a federal action is in violation of the charter as they read it, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is kind of, it's a piece of, similar to the Bill of Rights in the U.S. So if the Alberta government decides that federal action is in contradiction to the charter, they can vote on it and decide to vote to nullify federal law. And interestingly, the text says not only that they will not enforce federal law, but they will actively take measures to prevent the enforcement of federal law by federal agents. So if you're an RCMP officer attempting to enforce a gun ban in Alberta, you should expect the provincial police to prevent you from doing so.
Right.
And this piece of legislation is the keystone of the new Alberta provincial government's platform. It was held up for a couple of days so that the leader of the provincial government could introduce it personally in Parliament.
So,
So,
is there strong support in Alberta? Like, are they pretty much gonna go for it?
yeah, they've got a huge majority in
Okay.
provincial parliament. This is going to
Yeah.
be a thing.
So this is happening.
Uh, this is
Like,
happening.
wait. Okay. So you're giving us the context to understand what comes next, because what we haven't had is the test case, so to speak, right?
That's right.
We
So
haven't had provincial police facing off against federal, whatever they are
that's
in
right. So
Canada or
they're going to
whatever.
vote.
Yeah.
They're gonna vote on it, and then the test case is going to happen, and we're going to see. We're going to see. But the traditional clubs that the federal government used to have in transfer payments to the province, because of the debt crisis in the '90s, are all gone.
By
So
the
if the
way,
federal government,
in the U.S., this was always highway funds, because we
yeah,
have these federally funded highways all over the United States. And so
yeah,
if
whereas
you were
we don't have that.
if you were a bad boy, then the U.S. federal government would threaten to withhold highway funds, and you wouldn't be able to have working roads.
Well, and the U.S. Has a bit of a different situation because there's actually, like, when states wanted to nullify and the federal government was very determined, they sent in they federalized the National Guard and put federal troops on your state soil to
Right,
make sure that you integrated or whatever else.
right,
In Canada, if you wanted to attempt, the provincial police forces are much larger than the federal police force. So, like, if you attempted to use the Canadian equivalent of the FBI, which is the RCMP, you'd be you'd be so absurdly outnumbered, there'd just be no chance. Like, the RCMP
okay,
has no resources without local cooperation.
okay. But that makes it sound like Alberta will win and the federal government will back down. But I gather Trudeau is not in a backing down kind of mood, right?
No, so Trudeau, um, we're gonna see whether the provincial government really has the loyalty of the provincial police is really the question. And
Got it.
we're
Got it.
also
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
see how determined Trudeau actually is, whether he wants to
Right.
humiliate himself.
Oh, okay. So you're saying your guess thinking about those two aspects, the loyalty of the police and Trudeau himself, your guess is that, well, you don't know what he'll do, but if he does try to like really make a point of, you will obey, you will respect my authority. Um,
Yeah.
you're thinking he's heading for a political loss, political L,
Well,
right?
I think I really hope he does because I think uh, he could very well end Canada the day he attempts to do this. Because the other piece of this that's not well understood outside Canada is most of the federal money all comes from the western provinces. So
Oh,
you should think of the federal government as like a redistribution engine that takes dollars from Alberta and distributes them to the other provinces.
aha, I see.
So there's the Western elites have a lot of cards that they can play in this particular game,
Yeah,
and this is about one step short of a declaration of independence,
gotcha.
if
Okay.
you think about it.
This is
So
reminding me of talking to friends from Lega Nord. I think I'm saying it right, the Northern League in Italy, where they had the
yeah,
same complaint. They said all the Italian government is a big transfer from the north of Italy to the south of Italy. Why do we want to keep being part of this? You know?
that's right. But unlike in a lot of other places, the federal government in Canada really doesn't have nearly as many teeth as it would really like. Um, we saw during the Emergencies Act crisis that they don't have the loyalty of the army. So, Trudeau attempted to use the army to remove the protesters, and the army told him no. So it seems likely that if he wanted to use the army to do something else, you know, that the army didn't think was appropriate, that he doesn't have that card to play. He doesn't have a lot of dollars that he's taking from Alberta because Alberta's a huge net contributor. So he's in a really tough spot. And I think the fact that you see rebellion on all fronts from the provincial governments is a reflection of the fact that he's in a really tough spot.
Okay, cool. Anything else on Canada?
No, I think it's a fascinating piece. I think we should come
Absolutely.
back to it
Well, and of course,
in a
I
couple of
have a
months.
personal interest in secession. Um,
Yeah, well, I think the,
or
the best possible thing that could happen to Canada would be for it to collapse into a million pieces. So
okay, uh, I believe you. Um, yeah, secession, or thanks to my friend academic agent, a possibility that hadn't even occurred to me, ejection. I'll go for either,
yes,
right? Secession is where, like, say, Alberta decides to leave. Ejection is where federal Canada says, you're not part of Canada anymore to Alberta. Now, in that
yeah,
particular case, it sounds like secession is way more likely than ejection. But academic agent had suggested that because Scotland is a target of wealth transfer, they're the ones getting
yeah.
the money. He would like to eject Scotland, basically, so they don't have to keep being, so soaked by Scotland. You know.
Yeah, I feel the same way about Quebec. I'd like to boot
Yeah.
them out of Canada tomorrow morning. But
So
you
yeah,
know,
they can go. They can do their thing without you having to pay for it,
yeah,
right? Gotcha. Okay, then. Yeah, very interested. Thank you, and please do bring this back around if something epic happens with that Alberta versus Trudeau face-off, because I would be quite interested. As people may know, at one time the whole idea of secession or nations breaking up seemed kind of like something that happened in the distant past, and then the Soviet Union ended and we suddenly saw lots of secession, and then the things that seceded had more secession.
yes,
Right. So, like, I think Czechoslovakia became, got out of the Warsaw Pact, right, with the collapse of the Soviet Union,
yes, and then
and
broke
then
into
broke up,
two.
Yeah, and there's many other examples like that. So we went from having like the literature on secession was really sparse in terms of like real life or well, contemporary, real life
Yeah,
modern examples of secession. Whereas now, if you want to like study secession, I've seen some really interesting articles like what do you do with the national debt when someone secedes? I think Ryan
Well, it
McMaken
turns
wrote
out
on
there's
that.
been a lot of countries that have
Exactly.
fractured in the last 50 years.
And you can
Yeah,
go look and see what they did,
yeah.
see, and we have lots of examples. Well, some people did it this way, some people did it that way. Here's some pros and cons of different ways to handle it. So it's become like empirical as opposed to theoretical, right? So it might sound to Canadians like crazy, like Canada would never break apart, but it's not that crazy. It could happen.
Well, I mean, we almost did it in the 90s. Quebec was within a couple of percentage points of successfully voting to leave Canada.
And your
So,
impression is that had the vote gone the way gone pro secession, they really would have been out. It would have
oh yeah,
happened.
for sure,
Okay, yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
right, yeah. So it could happen. That would be very interesting. And I think it would, by the way, completely change the reputation of Canadians because everyone's like, Canada's placid and calm and polite, and nothing ever happens there, right? And if all this happened, people would be like, "Whoa, what happened? Where'd Canada? What happened to the Canadians?"
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there and not only that, there would be great meme fuel to see Trudeau humiliated so publicly. So, we can all
Yes,
root for that.
some of us have a personal interest in Justin Trudeau's political fortunes falling, right? Uh, a personal investment, I should say, an emotional investment in that. Um, okay, so now let's get to our main story for the day, which is Black Horse said to me privately, there is a really big story that is really not being covered. And before we even get into it, help people explain why it's not being covered well. Um,
Yeah, so we should uh, characterize what I mean by not being covered well. So
yeah,
if you've ever watched the financial news, you'll notice that like 98% of financial news deals with something that happened today or something that happened this week. So uh, a lot of these stories have been covered in the financial news, but they're all covered in the context of, well, this was a really bad day for this stock, or this was a really bad day for the NASDAQ composite, or this was a really bad day for the Dow. Um, which I think really does not do justice to the story of what's happened in the financial markets over the last 20 months.
sorry, I was muted. Okay, let's go to our first thing, which, am I on the right thing? Yes, I am. Oh, good. Okay, so I asked Black Horse to give us some context because this has just become a habit of mine. Somebody says, look at this big change. And I'm like, well, give me some kind of context. Maybe this is a change that happens all the time. Maybe everything else is changing in the same direction, right? So I'm always wanting to not have like a single data point. I want to see this in a bit larger context. So I asked Black Horse to give us some kind of sense of what's happening to the market overall because we do seem to be in a recession. I don't know if they've ever officially said it yet, right? Uh, Earlier we had a show saying it's the recession that dare not say its name or something, right?
Well, I don't
But
know I don't know how they're going to define a recession now.
they're running out of ways to define it because we've blown past 2 quarters and we're probably on 3 quarters down, right? At this point.
Yeah.
Last time we
Yeah, and
talked, it
it's
was
still not officially a recession.
two
So.
consecutive quarters, and now I think we're at 3 consecutive quarters, and they're still not calling it a recession. So it's just the usual government redefinition of terms. But yeah, so one could say, okay, yeah, you're showing us how all these big tech companies are down, but everybody's down. Well, yes, but we need to look at magnitude, right, Black Horse? That's
Yeah, so
yeah. Go
what
ahead.
we're seeing here is a chart of the S&P 500. The S&P 500 index is the 500 largest capitalized US companies. And you can see it's down from a peak of about 4,700 to about 3,900. So what's that, about 22%, something like
Right.
that?
And just to be clear, that peak is at the beginning of 2022. At the beginning of the year, um, look at that topmost point. That's the beginning of the year. And then it's down from there, like you said, around ballpark 20%.
Yeah. So what we're going to see, and note that the tech crash that we're seeing is with companies that are major components of the S&P 500.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that the S&P 500 the other 480 stocks or whatever it is that aren't part of this event are performing better than down 20%.
Right. Yeah. 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 What would might be nice to see is, and I guess it would, I don't know how hard it would have been to put it together, but what might have been nice to see is S&P 500 minus the companies that we're about to talk about, right?
Yes.
uh,
Yeah, well,
S&P
anyway,
minus big
when the
tech.
budget
Yeah.
for econ minis gets more than $1,000 a week, we'll get a nice market data terminal and figure that out. But
Exactly. Right.
I think we got some distance to go before that.
Okay, so we're going to start. We're kind of break. We're going to talk about big tech, but we're going to break it into pieces. And first, I guess we could call this the advertising story, right? This is
Yep.
a very interesting story, and we got to start with Meta Zuckerberg. That's what I'm calling him. This is the
Yeah.
representation of Zuckerberg in the metaverse thing that he's been working on, right? Um, uh, and in fact, why don't we just talk about the metaverse as a business proposition? Because they have been putting a little bit of money into this project, I think. Is that right, Black Horse?
Yeah, apparently not enough. If you look at the quality of that avatar. um, but the metaverse is this business proposition from Facebook where individuals will interact over virtual reality between avatar to avatar, and the idea is that this is a replacement for meat space basically. You'll replicate the experience of going shopping in a store by going to a metaverse store and
Mm-hmm.
look at the virtual reality renditions of the products. You'll go I don't know, you'll go on metaverse vacation or whatever and look at a virtual reality rendering of the Bahamas.
Sorry, I
um,
got to read this comment. Mia Yuri says 2001 calls it once its graphics back. Good line.
Yeah. So this is what Zuckerberg in his infinite wisdom thought was the future of the company.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as Facebook's penetration reached saturation um, in sort of the online interaction space. I guess the idea is that if you migrating more and more of your life into the metaverse, that's more and more both attention for them to sell advertising across, but also all the transactions that occur in the metaverse. You get the kind of benefit that Apple got out of the App Store, where I think the App Store is now uh, it's a significant portion. I'm not sure if it's the majority of Apple's revenue, but it's a huge part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea being that if you want to put up a Walmart inside the metaverse, then Meta can collect its take of all the products that you sell in this through
Get
this
some of
mechanism.
that. Yeah. Um, oh, and how's this business going, Black Horse, from a hard nosed business point of view?
Well, I would say not well. So if we move to our income statement, we can talk about this a bit more directly.
Okay, then we'll do the overall Facebook chart after that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you'll see there all these numbers I think are in millions in the income statement that you got there.
Yeah.
Let me just pull it up so I can see it.
Right. So there's
So
a
you can
number at the
see,
top left for advertising income. It says 27,187. That's actually $27 billion of income for December 31st, 2020.
the quarter ending December
Quarter ending.
31st, 2020.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so you can see this line here, I guess 44 in the Excel that I've screenshotted here.
Mm-hmm.
Reality Labs is what they're calling this business segment. And you'll see that um, the revenue for this is something like $285 million, and the costs for operations on line 49 in the quarter ending September 30th were three.
Right. So there, and you look back over
Or
you've
sorry,
got
that's loss from operations.
right, you've got a couple a little over 2 years of quarters here, and we're looking at 2 to 3.5 billion a quarter for
Yes,
what is this, like
in just
eight
burn.
quarters we're looking at. Yeah.
And not
Wow.
only that, if you look at the revenue line, there's no this is not a growing revenue situation here.
Oh, right.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
there's there
It,
seem to be some quarters where they seem to sell some technology that probably have some extraordinary items in there,
mhm,
like in Q4 2021.
right.
But there's no clear pattern here of growing revenue in the.
It's on family levels of spending and income and spending. These big numbers, I start to feel lost, but I assume that even from your perspective, Black Horse, a couple billion here, a couple billion there. I mean, it starts to add up to some concerning losses, right?
So, you know, that's pretty ugly.
I'm sorry, where do
That
you,
that's
our
pretty ugly.
profits are not here, I don't think, because those
So
are an income
the
statement.
income or loss from operations. So you can see family of apps there. That's all the rest
Oh, I
of
see. That's
Facebook.
the rest of it.
That's that's really ugly by any measure. There's no getting around that.
When the money being made by the rest of the company, uh, when that number and the money being lost on Reality Labs start to get really close, you're now looking at a business that is that number seems to be creeping overall kind of down. So the first thing we see
Yes.
end of
So
2020 is
this is the
15
other
billion, and now it's 9.3 billion this last quarter.
yeah yeah. So this is the other story about Facebook. Broadly speaking, income from ad revenue is has been down for several quarters now. So if you look at the highlighted section of the financial statement here, the revenue from ads peaks in Q4 2021, and each quarter since then, revenue from ads has been significantly less than that. So they've got some fixed costs. They've got, presumably a variety of things going on the cost side. I didn't pull any of that data, but revenue goes down, profits go down. This is not a very unique story in that regard.
Sorry, I'm distracted a little because everyone is pointing out that
I
there's
gather
buffering going
this
on.
yeah.
So I'm just looking for anything I can quit that's being naughty and eating up CPU just in case I can help. Um, I mean, I assume it's on my end when this happens. Give me just a sec here. Quit more things that don't need to be running right now.
If you're like AA, you can close your book you have open.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'll tell you, OBS itself is a hog. Jeez, it's just chewing through memory. Okay, let me see. Okay, let's see if it settles down a little bit. Okay, tell me. I am not seeing any more drop frames, so let's keep going. Okay, yeah, I did see it too, guys. That I was dropping frames for some reason. Okay, right. So I'm sorry. So what we highlighted is that Reality Labs is losing money, and it doesn't seem to be justifying that by what you want to see, even when you can afford to do this kind of thing, lose a couple billion every quarter for a while. Um, Nevertheless, you want to be able to tell a story that your income from it is growing, and so you're heading towards a point where yes, you're investing in the business, but it's gonna go uh, uh, black. It's going to go into the out of the red and into the black soon enough, right? That is not a story that we're seeing just scanning over the income from it and the costs of it for Reality Labs. At the same time, as you pointed out, family of apps is the rest of Facebook's business, like Facebook. uh, Money is going down, and you're saying that really has to do with the digital advertising story. So, should we turn to the overall Facebook chart to
Yeah,
show
let's have a look at that
what
to
the
show the
markets
consequence of
think?
this. Yeah.
Oops, not that one. There we go. Okay, got it. Meta daily, and this is all these charts from now on go back to August, so it's not quite 18 months, right? It's more like
Yeah,
15
15
months.
months.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
like 15-month charts from here on out to give some context. Um, I note that looking across all of them, generally it's this year where we start to see these dramatic declines by and large. It's
Yeah,
throughout
we we'll
2022.
see we'll see a slightly different story for each of these companies. Meta is probably the most dramatic. So you have a decline here from $380 to its low about $90. So something like a 77% decline of the stock over 15
Wow.
months. For
Wow.
context here, they vaporized 342 billion in market capitalization, or 18 and a half times the cost of buying Twitter. So they could buy 18 and a half Twitters for the amount of losses for shareholders they've printed in the last 15 months.
Right, and you're using, by that Twitter measure, you're using what Elon Musk and partners paid for Twitter as your measure, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
That's going to be our measure consistently here for how big these losses are. How many Twitters could you have bought for the damage in market cap?
Um, right. Also, I see that dramatic drop in February. That's not even the war, is it? That's early February.
No, that's earnings.
Oh, earnings report for
So you'll see several
uh,
discontinuities. There's
end
another
of
one recently.
so that would be the earnings report for Q4 2021,
Yes.
which it'll take them a month, I guess, to tell everybody. And then they told
Yeah.
them early February, and boom, major punishment right there.
Yeah, that's when ad revenue reverses from roughly 32 billion to 27 billion.
Mm-hmm.
So first decline in ad revenue in the history of the company, and a dramatic one.
And a big one. Right, right. Wow. Okay, so in fact, that is about one third of the story right there. Just that one day in February, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and then it's less dramatic, but creep down. Oh, and then we have one more drop very recently. So that's the Q3 report, I guess.
Yeah. That's the
Okay.
last one on our earnings statement, and that's where you saw another 25-30% retracement on their income from operations.
Right.
Um, so
And I'm sorry, didn't you have a term, you financial guys, you have a term for when there's no connection between the lines, right? It just
yeah,
drops through
gap.
a gap. Okay, yeah. So it gaps down after the Q1 report. It gaps down after the Q3 report. In both cases, in a very significant by percentage amount.
Yeah, 140, like 135 to just under 100. So you're talking like a 30% gap.
Yeah,
That's the kind of thing that you just don't see from a large cap company like this very often.
right. And it's happened
And that
twice
was the
this year.
day that Jim Cramer came on and cried on air. So
Right, right. Yeah, if you guys haven't seen that clip, strongly recommended. Um, okay, so um, now, okay, I am not someone who sits there reading the Wall Street Journal every day, but I guess even being at a bit of a distance from financial news in terms of my day-to-day consumption, I would have thought I would have been hearing that like Facebook is crashing and burning after something like this. But that's not really the buzz that I've picked up on. I mean, maybe you're more attuned and you hear people saying that.
yeah, I mean, you'll get stories I mean, the Nasdaq sell-off has definitely been a story consistently for the last 15 months, but I just think the magnitude of what's gone on here is not widely understood.
Yeah. So I thought this was very cool, and thank you for bringing to our audience what you would think would be headlines on, I don't know, MSNBC or whatever the various financial outlets are. They'd be saying, wow, what does this mean? Facebook has, in terms of market cap, has shrunk dramatically from where it was. Um, and it doesn't seem like they're covering it. So you have to come to our humble little channel here to find this out. Um, oh, somebody says I shorted FTT. What's FTT? Is that Facebook?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Oh,
Um,
I guess I thought that was Facebook.
Finning, no, that's the Canadian FTT symbol.
Okay. Anyway, he said he
It must
shorted
be
it.
some index. Anyways,
He
it's not a S&P 500 stock.
he made money. Anyway, okay. So right. So you had said I don't know if you said it while I was getting distracted by stuttering video here, but you had said a statement about digital the return on digital advertising, or I forget the terminology you use. Say that again and explain it to us.
Yeah, so there's two stories playing out here. There's the total failure of the Meta business, and then there's the decline in price, or the decline in value of digital advertising. And that story has played out not just at Facebook, but also at some other places. So if we go to the Google chart next here.
Right. And again, why go to Google? Because like Facebook, Google is primarily their primary business income is from advertisers, right?
Yeah, so Google is kind of a split company. They've got the phone business, and um, they've got the Android business, and they've got the digital advertising business. And the digital advertising business is the bulk of their revenue. Um, and
Okay,
you
so
have
I have the Google chart up now. Again, this is 15 months, and the real sort of noticeable where you can see a trend down is kind of sort of from the beginning of the year, maybe more like February, I guess.
something like that.
Yeah.
Um, and you're seeing exactly the same story here as you see, well, a very similar story that you saw at Facebook, where pricing power on digital ads is really declining. And so we have like 60%, 70, sorry, not $60, so like 35% retracement on the price of Google over
Hmm.
that, 9-month period.
Right. Yeah, so
So,
this isn't quite as dramatic as Facebook, like a 75% drop, but it's, I don't know,
but in terms of
heading towards a
magnitude,
50% drop or something.
in terms of magnitude, just from a raw dollars point of view,
Mm-hmm.
this is $802 billion of market cap destruction, or 50 times the size of the Twitter buyout.
Yeah, I see.
So,
You gotta multiply stock price times the number of shares out there to understand the real impact. And so the stock price drop is not as big as the Meta or Facebook stock price drop, but the capitalization, the stock price times stocks, is actually almost twice. Well, I'm sorry, I missed the numbers. Was it
it's only a
like
little bit
twice as
bigger,
much? Only a
only
little
a
bit
little
bigger.
bit bigger,
Okay. Okay.
maybe 20% bigger, 25%
20%
bigger.
bigger. Okay. Wow. Invented money. Anyway,
Well,
this is what makes people feel like there's something fake in stock markets, right? Like, how
the
can
other thing
something
about
that
it
was
is,
supposedly worth this much suddenly be worth like hundreds of billions of dollars less? That just seems like it's all pretend. You know what I mean, to the layman.
the other thing to realize here is how much power changes hands when something like this happens. So, like, there was a lot of headlines made about the influence that Zuckerberg had in his sort of campaign of donations around the 2020 election.
Mm.
Um, that's not going to be happening again, at least from Zuckerberg.
Interesting
Uh,
point.
so, whenever you see a big secular change like this, what you're looking at is a massive transfer of power.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. Right.
So,
And it's worth mentioning that from say the perspective of us and our friends, uh, Mark Zuckerberg, the Google guys having a lot of power hasn't really been something that's worked out well for us.
yeah, yeah,
just to be blunt about it.
yeah. So maybe whoever gets it next, maybe we'll like them better. Who knows?
Who knows? Who
One
knows?
thing at a time.
Okay, right. So anyway, Facebook and Google, the rest of the things we'll look at are kind of different stories, right? Because they're not really advertiser driven in terms of revenue. Facebook and
Yeah. So then
Google very much are the
the next
digital advertising story.
yeah, the next segment we're going to look at here, I guess, is the digital retail piece.
Right.
So obviously, the elephant in that room is Amazon.
Okay, got the
So if
chart
we
up.
we go there next.
Yeah.
So again, we're seeing here from a peak of about 180 retraced all the way to about $90, so about 50% retracement.
Boom.
Again, driven by some big gaps on earnings. Um, some perspective here. That's 850 billion in reduction of market cap. Um, so you know, really, really, really large. I think 21 times the Twitter buyout.
And wait a
Twitter
second,
buyout.
you just said
No, no, no.
850
Sorry, I
billion.
850 billion. The Twitter buyout was 40 million.
Mm-hmm.
So what's
40 billion.
850 divided by 40?
Right.
Yeah,
10.
21,
Yeah, okay, yeah, 21 times.
21 times
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm
the
just
piece.
grasping the numbers. 850 billion isn't that far when you get up to these kinds of numbers from, say, $1 trillion.
Yes,
I'm willing to do
yes.
the Mr. Evil or Dr. Evil or whatever, put the pinky down.
Amazon was famously the first $1 trillion company. They are no longer a $1 trillion company as a consequence of this.
Wow.
Um, so uh,
Wow.
that's a thing.
And it's so I've kind of been through this before since I'm older. Um, Black Horse, and that is you see a lot of like puff pieces about how genius various people are, and they know how to basically grow this company forever and stuff like that. And then something like this comes along, and suddenly Bezos, Zuckerberg, etc., don't seem like the dazzling geniuses they seemed like while the stock price kept climbing quarter after quarter. You know?
Yeah. Well, the Meta one is particularly just damning because everybody who looked at that product, there was nothing impressive about it.
Oh my goodness. So like the only
Uh,
one impressed was Mark Zuckerberg, basically.
I guess so. Yeah. I assume he was impressed. I don't
Okay,
know.
okay. So, but what's the story as we turn to the retail story first with Amazon? What is happening from your point of view? I know that we'd already
Uh,
talked on the show about how um, during the lockdowns, certain companies or tech companies um, were kind of temporarily inflated because basically people's buying habits changed because they were locked up in their house. So they
yeah.
ordered stuff from Amazon, they watched more stuff, watched more TV, things like this. But those corrections we thought kind of were earlier this year, right? You and I had discussed that. We
Yeah.
looked at
So
a
we
bunch of
talked
those
about that way
corrections.
back in
Yeah,
in February, right?
and we thought those were kind of done after several months, several months into the year, so that doesn't really tell us what's going on since then, because now we're like 2 quarters past those adjustments to the post lockdown life, kind of return to normalcy, right? And yet
Yeah.
these guys keep on going down. So what's going
Yeah. So
on?
a huge part of this story is the interest rate story. Um,
Mm,
we talked about this briefly. I can't remember which stream it was on, but um, you know, lowest resolution value calculation for stocks is called the dividend discount model for stock valuation. It argues that you should approximate the price of a stock based on all the future distributions to its shareholders. You take the future distributions to the shareholders, uh, pretend that that's the payment stream of some kind of hypothetical bond with a risk profile, compare that bond with the appropriate risk discount to the risk-free rate of return, and then you've got the valuation of the stock. The dividend discount model of stock prices totally breaks down in the zero interest rate environment that existed in the period surrounding 2020. Um,
mm-hmm.
and so you have this really fundamental break in the way that growth companies are valued, where the dividend discount model says that companies with growing future revenue in a zero interest rate environment are infinitely valuable. um, the price should you know asymptote up to infinity.
Right.
um, Obviously there are not an infinite number of dollars in the world, so the model is not giving you an accurate answer, but certainly something weird goes on with the price of growth stocks when you have zero interest rates. When you have interest rates that approach the rate of growth of earnings for a growth company, you have a very, very different kind of profile for the value of those future revenue streams. And so you'll see this. Tech stocks are the biggest kind of growth stocks in the market, so you see it the most severely here, where even if we discount the changes in the growth prospects of these stocks, the changes in the valuation profile are also quite dramatic for them.
Okay, okay. So sounds like we have sort of a parentheses inside of a larger story. The parentheses was the lockdowns, right?
Yeah.
Which we saw caused a bit of a boom in certain stocks, and then we saw a collapse of that. Pretty much, we thought more or less that effect had washed out by the end of Q1 this year, say. But then that's a little episode within a larger story, which is the unreality of nearly 0% artificially low, definitely artificially low interest rates, um, which, like you're saying, made some of these companies seem like, oh, they'll grow forever, right? And so it
Yeah.
sounds like what we're seeing here is, and that's something that was going on before the lockdowns, that interest rate environment, if I remember correctly. Um,
That's right.
yeah, and
Y-
so now we're seeing the end of a larger story of just people being in fantasy land about the valuation of these companies, right?
Yeah, well, we have three stories going on all at the same time. We
Mm,
we have that story, we have the end of lockdown story, and we have declining margins on a lot of these products. We talked about online ad revenue as a problem.
hmm.
Amazon is struggling to compete with the likes of Walmart. Um,
Oh,
Walmart has had a long time to react to what they've been doing. They have, you know, places like Walmart now have delivery services that will deliver to your door for
right.
groceries and for products. So Amazon suddenly doesn't look nearly as unique as they once did.
Uh,
Um, so there are some business challenges the as well as the valuation challenges, as well as the end of lockdown challenges. This world where, Walmart, Target, etc., were all the showrooms for Amazon,
hmm.
appears to be kind of disappearing.
Right. You go into the retail and you scan it with your Amazon app and then press a button to order it and have it sent to your home and walk out with nothing
That's
in your
right, and
hands, right?
yeah,
And they're putting an end to that by offering
yeah,
by offering reasonable service, right? Okay, right. So by shrinking revenue margin, what you're saying is with Amazon being kind of the game in town in terms of online ordering for most products, they had some leeway in terms of their how much profit they made, right?
yeah,
But now
yeah,
they've got
exactly.
serious competition, and they cannot just charge what they want to.
Yeah, they're gonna have to respond to that competition, and
Got it.
operating in a competitive retail market is quite different than the situation Amazon was in for quite a long time.
Right. Let's go to the what you thought should be included in this retail story, which is PayPal.
Yeah,
And man, they're pretty at least from the stock price. This is a pretty dramatic story here. Wow. What
yeah.
is the
So
percentage on that? Jeez.
uh, like 75,
Yeah,
maybe more.
on the scale of what we saw with Facebook in terms of stock
Yeah,
price decline. Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, what's
So,
going on here?
well, some of this is a valuation story. So PayPal's valuation um, got pretty out of control during the zero interest rate environment, when online and during a period when online retail seemed like it would grow forever. People overwhelmingly use PayPal for online purchases and not for purchases in real life. So their fortunes are quite intimately linked with how much time people, or how much money people are spending online. There's also been some pretty serious management problems there. So those of you, a lot of people probably heard their terms of service change announcement, where they announced that if one of their customers forwarded misinformation,
Right.
that PayPal would fine them. I think it was $1,500.
Right. And
Turns
I
out people,
assume what that meant was if you have a PayPal balance, we will withdraw from it. But a bunch of people, including me, have our checking accounts hooked up to PayPal or our cards.
yeah,
And people thought they were going to go beyond your PayPal balance. I really doubt that that's what they meant. Go beyond your
uh,
PayPal balance and dip into like your checking account. And that really freaks people out. Right.
yeah. I mean, this is a policy that needs a test case to really know what they're planning to do.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is just great. This is just
Yeah.
total madness.
Vision of
You're a
Confrontation
payment process.
says he says $2,500 per incident was what they
Yeah,
were
I mean,
floating.
well, they floated it, then he withdrew it, then they
Yeah.
slipped it into a later terms of service update.
Right.
So, I mean, declaring war on your customers is always a funny business strategy. I
Yeah.
had a former boss who very famously sued one of his customers to try to recover an invoice, and
Hmm.
suing your customers never works out well. Threatening to fine your customers for their illicit online activity, like I don't know what the thinking is there.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, we
but
were thinking of PayPal as something kind of like the relationship you have with a bank, right? And just imagine your bank saying, we've been watching some of the things you've been posting on Facebook, the memes you've been posting on Facebook, and we're going to have to ding your checking account for that. I
yeah, well,
mean,
I
you
live in
would be out
Canada.
of
I
that
don't have.
bank so fast.
I live in Canada. I don't have to imagine that.
Oh,
So.
well, that's true. You're already on the other side of a lot of this dystopian stuff.
Yeah. So, anyways, turns out it's bad business practice, especially to like announce it publicly and stuff. So,
Right.
um, uh,
Jeez.
you know, PayPal law vaporized 261 billion in market cap, or six and a half Twitters worth of valuation. So,
You're talking
that's
about
a thing.
over the period we're looking at in this chart, you mean?
Yes.
Right, right. Yeah, I don't know if anyone's keeping track at home here, as Black Horse reels off the capitalization destruction, but we're somewhere in the 2 trillion plus range already, and we haven't finished.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're not done yet, and
we're not done yet.
I think I picked five of them, but there's more I could have picked. Um,
Yeah, but to be fair,
for,
you're picking some of the biggest players, right?
yeah,
In
I
terms of
mean,
market
but
cap.
but the folks at home have to go and look at the Beyond Meat stock chart. It is the glory of the 2022 stock market.
Okay, so shall we go on to two more stories that are yet again different from first the advertising story with Facebook and Google, and then the online retail with Amazon and PayPal. Now we have a company dear to my heart. I'll tell you, I'm biased, so I'll let you talk more here. Apple.
Yeah. Okay.
And
So
it is a more confusing story because at least for the time period you picked, it just seems to kind of be back to where it was 15 months ago, right?
yeah. So what you're seeing here is like a 30% retracement from its peak. So you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at the kind of thing that happens to a company that's struggling to produce earnings growth. So
Got
this
it.
is a much, much more muted story, but
Yeah.
it's got to be in here because of the scale of Apple as a company.
Yeah.
It's historically been one of those outperformers in the space where when the rest of the NASDAQ was down, you could count on Apple to be up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in this environment, Apple is behind the S&P 500 by a significant margin.
Now, I've never gathered from you that you're a big Apple watcher like I am, and I haven't been. I used to listen to their quarterly financial calls every month, every quarter. That's how big of an Apple watcher I was. But I kind of got out of the habit. Do you have any idea of why Apple's struggling here? Because
The
they still have great products
well,
from my point of view. So.
their problem is the App Store revenue. So all
Oh.
these other stories we've been telling have been, commonly used apps on the Apple infrastructure. So uh, PayPal is
Oh.
a really common app on the Apple infrastructure. Uh, you've got uh, Amazon, which is another really important app for them, and so on and so forth. Every one of these other tech stories, because of the way Apple architected their revenue model,
Mm-hmm.
plays negatively for Apple.
I see. So don't look at this and think they're not doing a good job of selling iPhones and Macs and Apple Watches. They might be doing okay with that, but
Yeah,
then the App Store revenue, the way they've done that, if people don't know, they get a 30% take on things purchased through the Apple App Store, like the apps, or even when you're using the apps, they tend to get a 30%. So good thing for them, they get all that money, right? Bad thing for them is their fortunes are now tied into retail, uh, online
yeah,
retail,
yeah,
basically people pulling their iPhone out and making a purchase using an app. If people do less of that, Apple feels the hit in their bottom line.
And not only that, they've got this arrangement with Facebook AL to participate in online ad revenue that occurs through the App Store as well.
Ah,
And this has been a problem for them as well. They've had a huge fight over the over who gets to keep the over whether people like Facebook get to keep the data from the app, whether they get to get access up through the app store to the data about where the person is, that kind of stuff.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Right, right,
and this has been a huge commercial fight uh, between Apple and the tenants of the App Store.
right. Yeah,
Um,
Apple famously has been pushing for privacy as a unique value proposition for the Apple platform. Basically, if you use the other guys, they are selling your data to everybody, and you get creepy advertising that's a little too on the nose, right? Um, and then if you, oh, I see. I think I'm sorry. I just got to see. Yeah, they're talking about my audio, and I bet I know what I need to fix. Um, and if what was I saying? Darn, I got distracted. Shoot.
yeah, so they're fighting. They're fighting with the
Oh yeah,
App
yeah.
Store for privacy.
So Apple is trying to sell privacy. The problem with that is a lot of the business models, especially advertising based, they need that data to advertise to people effectively, and so that
Yeah,
goes against Apple wanting to keep their users' privacy.
yeah, and you're fighting with your sales agents there, right? Apple
Right.
takes a cut of everything they sell. If you make it harder for your sales agents, that's tough business.
Yep.
So the
Okay.
last
Let me
one we
get my
wanted
mic
to
up.
pull
They're
here
saying I'm
is the
really quiet,
Netflix
and I think I
story.
see the
This
problem.
is a little bit
Okay.
gratuitous because the story is
Hopefully. Oh
mostly
wow, probably
over,
too loud
but
now.
I
But
like to revel in the destruction of
um,
Netflix. So um,
okay. Hopefully that's more like it. Yeah.
here
Yeah.
we
It was
see it
quiet.
down from
One more thing
700.
to
I guess
catch up.
it's recovered to about
To
250,
mul-
but still,
multi.
down 66% over the course of 15 months. We got to enjoy that a little bit.
Uh, for which one now?
Sorry, I can't hear you if you're talking.
Uh-oh. Really? Oh dear. Okay. Wait a sec.
Mr. Carson. I don't know if I'm out or you're out. In the
Okay. Can
chat,
you
if
hear
you
me
can
now?
hear me,
Can you hear me?
I can, I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah. It was. Anyway, the way we hear each other got messed up. Okay.
Okay.
Right. So Apple story is. Oh yeah. And where's again we see a gap. Not quite as
Yep.
dramatic as some we've seen, but we see a gap, and that is Q3 report, Q3 earnings
Yep.
report, I assume, right?
That's
Yeah.
right.
Oh, and that in fact, we waited a little longer than I wished we had, just because of various things going on. When I kept seeing news about horrible Q3 reports across the tech industry, and kind of wished we had been able to like jump right on it when all those Q3 reports were coming out a couple weeks ago, or in October. Wait, when was it?
It
Wasn't that
was in
long ago?
October.
It was
Yeah.
October, yeah, yeah. Because it was amazing, just one after another. Bad news, bad news, bad news. And I assume you stay more plugged into these things. You were definitely seeing that, right? Q3 2022 reports were rough.
Yeah. Yeah. So well, we couldn't hear each other. I reviewed the Netflix chart, which you definitely weren't showing.
Oh, sorry.
So
Netflix chart is there. Sorry.
okay. So this one's a little bit gratuitous. The story is mostly played out at this point,
Mm.
but I hate Netflix with a deep and mighty passion. So I got to get them in the
You
Hall of Shame here.
you didn't enjoy the artistry of Cuties, Black
Uh, you
Horse?
know, they can go out of business as far as I'm concerned.
very
They've lost they've
very
lost
politely
five
put.
Twitter they've lost five Twitter buyouts over the past 9 months,
Wow.
down about 67%.
Yeah.
Um, you know, life is tough when your customers hate what you produce. So
Um, okay. So yeah, that is mostly what we wanted to highlight across big tech, right? I mean, like you said, there's a lot of other stories we could tell. But when we think about the big guys, we're thinking about Facebook, now called Meta, Google, Amazon, Apple. And we really haven't skipped. I mean, PayPal and Netflix are relatively small compared to those guys, right? Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, I don't know what else. Maybe Intel or something. I don't know. I don't know who
Yeah,
else
the,
would
the
really
the
be up
chip
there.
producers are kind of a different thing because they've
Yeah,
got this whole conflict over Taiwan that's playing into what's going on.
right.
So it's a much more confused kind of, and not just the conflict over Taiwan, this new piece of regulatory, um, I don't know what you would call it, this new set of regulations requiring the defense industry to buy chips produced in the United States. So I don't know. I haven't followed that story closely enough to report on it, but there's a lot of other damage out there.
Um, Sam153 says over on Subscribestar says nice to see big tech hurting, and it's sad for me, but I have to agree. I would say that I was a little bit of the had a little tinge of the techno optimist, and this was a long time ago, like 30 years ago. But the internet seemed pretty exciting. Apple seemed pretty exciting to me. Um, it seemed like technology was bringing some cool stuff to our lives. But what we've seen more recently, right, is that big tech has just thoroughly aligned themselves with evil, in my view, just to be blunt about it. Um, and they didn't have to do that. I mean, they could have literally just, made good products and kept their
Yeah,
nose out of this stuff.
I
And I,
I do think some of that
mm,
techno-optimist case really neglects the way these businesses got founded. So,
mm-hmm,
like, if you looked at the stories we got told about the beginnings of Facebook, Apple, Netflix, etc., in what we got told those stories in the period between 2005 and 2015, and all those stories we got told sort of conveniently left out the role of the U.S. government and the security state in the
right.
creation of all of these things.
Not Apple, I don't think, but
No, Apple precedes that, but
yeah, yeah. But Facebook
certainly,
definitely. We know a lot more now, and it's pretty dark.
yeah, certainly Facebook, certainly Twitter. Like um, these aren't the same kind of classic capitalist stories that you might think of when you think about the history of Walmart, for example.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's I got to give them credit. What is it? The people of this world are wiser even than the children of light, or whatever, right? Um,
Yeah.
you got to give them credit. I mean, they had some foresight to get in on the ground floor with Google, with Facebook. The intelligence apparatus. Um, they saw something coming. They saw a way to get in there right at the beginning and have a lot of power over the culture, basically, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, okay, let's see. We also have a couple super chats, generous super chats. Thanks, guys. Okay, enlightened despot is from your neck of the woods. Well, broadly. Canada has an urbanization problem. About 80%, 87% of the population live in cities run by woke mayors, even Alberta. That means any move to secession can only happen before urbanization is complete. So, yeah, he's talking about how the urban versus rural story is playing out in Canada. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a more complicated story. The urbanization story is a more complicated story in Western Canada than it is broadly in the United States.
Mm,
So in the United States, well, okay, let's talk about the story in Canada. So in Canada, the strategy that the federal government has been using in order to undermine the local cultures of Canada has been to import as many people as possible. So we've been bringing in a half a million people a year to Canada. Population is about 38 million. So a half a million
oh,
people a
wow.
year that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Uh, the problem for them is that more than two-thirds of these people settle in the Toronto area,
Mm-hmm.
and a large fraction of the remainder settle in the Vancouver area. So instead of homogenizing the population of Canada, what they've actually been doing is accentuating the regional differences.
Got it.
Um, so Toronto, which is the part of Canada from which I come, now is you know, uh, the neighborhood I used to live in was like 70% first generation immigrant, which is
Mm-hmm.
not uncommon for, and that was out of like 300,000 people in that ward of Toronto. It's not an uncommon situation. Toronto is more diverse than New York City now.
Wow.
Whereas a lot of the parts of Canada that are the political opponents of the people who already ran Toronto, uh, haven't experienced the same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so what you actually get is more cultural difference between like the city Toronto and Vancouver versus Calgary and Edmonton than existed previously.
And it
And
would have been there. It would have been there even before the mass immigration, I'm guessing.
it would
There
have
was
been
some
there before
difference.
the mass
Yeah,
immigration.
right.
So I don't think the urban versus rural story in Canada is really quite the same thing as it is in a lot of other places. It's a more complicated dynamic. Um, we'll see how that plays out over the next period of time. But it's certainly true that you're not going to see the sort of culture that I came from in the Greater Toronto area ever assert itself as an independent country. But the fact that you're not going to see that doesn't mean that other parts of the country might not have a future where they do so.
Yeah, so that's interesting. What you're telling me is that the western provinces, like Alberta, is one of those provinces, right?
Yes.
Um, could secede. Let's just play with the scenario here. Could secede and find that they're kind of like the older Canada in terms of demographics. They haven't particularly been dramatically affected by the mass immigration that's happening throughout the West, and they can kind of go their own way potentially,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Well, and
Maybe
not only
maybe
that,
less
the
less less impacted by sort of globalist Tony Blairite of the future that they have for us, you know?
yeah, it's just a very different place. Like
Yeah.
most of the people who went to Western Canada because they've had their own kind of immigration went out there to work to do things like roughneck in the oil patch. But the jobs in the oil patch involve working outside in places where it regularly goes down to minus 60 at hard manual labor. So they attract a very specific kind of immigrant.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so it's not it's a very different thing.
Yeah, so you're saying even the immigration that has happened, which is much less than in the east there, even the immigration that's happened is uh,
Well,
different in character.
it's overwhelmingly been internal migration.
Hmm.
Um, People from Eastern Canada, a lot of people who used to work in the fishing industry famously went out there. A lot of
Hmm.
people from it got to the point in like the mid 2000s where you could earn like 200,000 plus a year to go out there and like roughneck as a blue collar worker, which got very attractive for a certain kind of guy. Um, so it's a very different kind of phenomena than the kind of like welfare tourism that has driven a lot of migration to
Yeah, I
Canada.
was gonna say it sounds a little bit more like what I think of as the older American frontier kind of thing, right? Like,
Yeah, very similar to the
which
gold
included,
rush.
yeah, which included immigrants, right? But basically, it was people who were coming to like work hard and not to soak off anyone, you know?
Well, and also coming from other parts of America, right? So if you look at the
Right,
California gold rush as an example, yeah, there were immigrants, but the overwhelming majority of the immigrants were from places like New York, not
right,
from overseas. And
right.
that
Yeah,
just it produces something quite different. Um,
yeah, that's
so
interesting. Maybe a sort of reverse bioleninism, right? Instead of bioleninism, you have a selection for pulling out of the rest of Canada some of the more sort of hard workers, and you know,
yeah, yeah,
right?
it's an interesting phenomena. I don't fully understand it, but uh, to tell the same story, the same urban versus rural story that you see in the U.S. is just it's
Mm-hmm.
not
Not that
fully
simple.
appreciating.
Yeah, I mean, I understand his point. He's saying that the cities are run by woke mayors, even in Alberta. Probably true, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I mean, some of it's true, some of it's not true. Some
mm,
of the most hardcore, like, reformed churches are out in places like Calgary. Um, you know, if you look at, uh if you look at the pastors who actually went to jail in Canada as an example of, like, hard resistance to modernity, you'll
hmm
actually find some of these people are, well, all of these people are from urban centers, um, which
oh, huh.
if you had thought about that in the context of the United States, you would not have seen that kind of resistance in the urban areas.
Hmm. Okay. A little bit of a
So,
different story. Okay, then one last one from TJ. Very generous. Thank you. Just a tip for the work you do here. Thanks. And in fact, since he was so generous, let me actually read what he said in the chat. Black Horse seems to be a very talented economist who can simplify it for us. So, great feedback. Thank you. Yes, really appreciate what Black Horse brings to econ minis. He has leveled it up, as they say in the corporate world. I still can't get over that. Do you guys have this in Canada? The minister for leveling up. It's got to be
we
the
do not.
worst. That has got to be the worst. I mean, I thought companies were bad. Minister for leveling up. Give me a break.
Oh, we have our own cringy titles, but
And it's like we're in
uh,
kindergarten or something, you know? It's just
oh my goodness.
insulting. Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much. This is of great interest to me. I am in the tech industry professionally. Fortunately, I'm not in these parts that are bouncing up and down, or well, going down like this. Though I was tempted. I thought about going to work for Apple at one time, but I decided to stay in the middle of the country, and I think I would have had to go to California, and I just chose not to do that. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it is quite interesting, and as you said, beyond the financial impacts and oh, and somebody asked a good question. I thought you could comment on before we finish about capitalization, but beyond the financial impacts, the profit and loss statements and the stock price, uh, you brought up a really good point. As we have seen, companies are very much in the political game. A little hard to tell how much it has to do with the state making them do things and how much they want to do things because they're all sort of part of the managerial elite, right? But whatever the cause, complicated cause and effect, uh, we've started to feel oppressed by these big tech companies. It's fair to say, a lot of
Yeah.
us, right? And so that brings a different dimension to this story that we talked about today. That, like you
Yeah.
said,
Well,
that they may not be the kinds of political players they were even 2 years ago in the election, right?
yeah. Yeah, certainly, you know, trillions of dollars of market cap getting vaporized has its consequences. Um,
Yeah, somebody might have
so,
to tighten the belt a little bit. Um,
I mean, my favorite characterization of this came from a recent Peter Thiel interview where
mm,
he compared California to Saudi Arabia and compared the tech boom to, like, the resource curse of an oil state. And he
mm-hmm,
said, Saudi Arabia is kind of the middle case of an oil state. It kind of works, it kind of doesn't. The wealth generators have this crazy ideology of Wahhabism that they export as a consequence of their enormous wealth.
right.
California has its own version of Wahhabism, and I think it's a very apt comparison.
That is fascinating. I had not heard that. Um,
So,
yeah. Oh yeah, two things I want to do. So first of all, somebody asked a really good question in the chat. Sorry, I can't remember who it was. He said, "Where does all that capitalization go that went poof?" Um, because I guess the
so the
idea is that we expect that to sort of represent something real in the world, and where did those real resources go that were being directed towards Google and Facebook and so forth, right?
Well, I mean, the answer to this is previously the people who owned stock in these companies had the ability to either sell the stock or borrow against the stock to
Mm-hmm.
move enormous resources. Um, when when market capitalization like this disappears, it's like reverse money printing. You might imagine collecting a whole bunch of dollars from around the United States and then just, you know, lighting them on fire or something. That's the economic effect that it has. So it has when you collect dollars together and light them on fire, there's a
Deflationary effect.
relative there's a
Deflationary.
deflationary effect,
Yeah.
and there's a relative economic value effect. So we
Mm-hmm.
focused a little bit on the damage that it has done to the people who previously possessed this wealth,
Yeah.
and that's obviously a thing, but
Mm-hmm.
it also has a broad effect in the economy. So
Right.
whenever you see a big stock market correction like this, you see anti-inflationary pressure as a consequence of it, because the
Right.
stock market and valuations are they have a uh, they have an effect on the supply of capital.
Right. So to make it simple, I mean, it probably will mean that we'll see resources redirected a bit, right?
Yes, you
People who would have poured it into big tech, because obviously you can't lose by, buying Apple and buying Google and Facebook, will now be looking elsewhere. So I mean, what I don't know yet, or I don't know if you've seen any hints of it. What is the elsewhere where that investors' money is going to flow? Do you have an inkling of that yet?
well, for the moment, the elsewhere is like government bonds, but what happens next is hard to say. I mean,
Okay.
if I could accurately tell you what how the capital will be redeployed, then I would be much richer than I
You could
presently
get
am.
really rich. Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah. So I was just wondering, would we see them trying to build up brick and mortar Main Street retail again or something? I don't know. Some kind of return. Um,
we'll find out.
we'll
Uh,
find out.
I
Something to
mean,
watch.
at the moment, the EPA is desperate to make sure it doesn't go into resource development. So we'll see how well they do with that.
Wait, say it again. The EP, the Environmental Protection
The
Agency.
EPA is desperate to try to make sure that it doesn't translate itself into onshore manufacturing and resource development in the United
Oh,
States.
right, right, right. Yeah, actually, like opening useful things that make useful things.
Yeah,
Um,
well, that would be the worst thing that could happen to the United States. So
right, yeah. Energy independence again, just like that crazy Trump is in office again or something. Um,
yeah,
okay, let's see. I'm where I want to be. Sorry, I'm trying to. Why is this not working? Okay, give me a sec. I'm wanting to highlight one more thing. Hey, so a little thing I've been cooking in the background with a bunch of American friends is the Old Glory Club, which launched earlier this week, and I just wanted to make sure to mention it here on this channel. It is a competing channel, you could say, but it is also I'm the president of the Old Glory Club. It just so happens, and so I wanted to highlight it to you. This is the YouTube channel for it. We also have a Substack where Charlemagne has been putting out some pieces along with a bunch of the rest of us. I mentioned Charlemagne just because he has another one coming, and his articles so far have been really good, and we all love Charlemagne's writing. Um, but others have been publishing there as well. If you go to the Substack, which I will try to highlight for you, then you will also see a piece by me. In fact, that's what I'll share. I will share the piece by me that explains what the Old Glory Club is very, very briefly. And it's a post just called the Old Glory Club, and I'll share that in the live chat as well. Would love to see you all. Um, where is it? There it is. No, welcome. There it is. Okay, top post. Yeah, here's my piece explaining what it is. Very short piece, worth your time, I think, so you can have some sense of what we're up to. Um, trying to we're starting with some online ventures, but the point is to take this out of cyberspace, which, as Black Horse has just been making clear to us, is maybe not the place to put your chips anymore. Cyberspace. So we want to focus a little bit more on the real world and on supporting each other in the real world. And so we're looking back to ways that people used to organize and trying to bring a little bit of that back. So please take a look at my Substack article that explains what it is. And then I recommend that you subscribe to the Substack, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We just did a bunch of stuff on Monday leading up to the midterms, and some of it related to the midterms, some of it was just stuff we wanted to talk about, sort of relating to the themes of this particularly American association. And I think you'll find some fun stuff. Just to give you something to click on to start with, Charlemagne and Red Hawk did a collection of Biden moments 45 minutes of Biden moments with Charlemagne and Red Hawk laughing all the way through. It is light entertainment when you're feeling like, it's the end of the day, low energy, you don't want to have a big think. Put on Biden moments with Charlemagne and Red Hawk, and laugh during the laugh at the ashes or something like that. Okay, so uh, excited about that project, and it's off to a great start with our launch day on Monday this week. That just happened on Monday this week, and look for more from us, from the Americans on that project. Okay, thanks once again, Black Horse. Such a gift that you spare your time from building wealth in constructive and wonderful ways, right? And and just help us try to understand the world a little bit better, which I think is valuable. And in particular, what I'm hoping, and I think we've already seen it, right, Black Horse? What I'm hoping is, we're not claiming to be prophets or anything, but I find that big events come along, and when I have a better sense of the context, coming into them, then I'm less surprised by the big event. And I have a much better ability to place it into a context and understand what it means, as opposed to that feeling of just like, wow, that came out of the blue. What does it mean?
Well, and also you can keep your feet, right?
Keep your
This
feet.
is something,
Exactly. Not panic.
yeah. I mean, you talked about this in the context of witnessing 9/11, right?
Yeah.
You saw a huge number of Americans just kind of lose their sense of what their sensibilities completely,
Yeah.
right?
What is right and wrong? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's have the Patriot Act. Let's all the rest of this stuff
Yeah.
because some terrible thing happened.
Right.
Well, if you could have contextualized that a little bit better, then
Yeah.
maybe, just maybe, you could kind of keep your head.
Stay sane and stay moral. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's part of what I hope to bring here with Econ Minis is that as we just went through today, some dramatic things are going on, probably more to come. Um, the world is not standing still, and we'd like to be able to have a sane, solid, feet on the ground sense of things, so that as things happen, we're not blown away, and hopefully don't lose all our money because we invested in something dumb, right? Because I wouldn't want that for any of you guys. Okay, thanks very much, and we'll be back next week. I believe, I haven't talked to Ryan yet, but I believe we'll continue on with our series on left-wing terror. A little bit grim, but it's sort of been stunning to me that with all of my far-right friends, I'm the one doing the series on left-wing terror. But it has to be done, and I think, again, with that theme of context, I think gives us context for understanding some of the stuff we've seen over the past couple of years, and unfortunately, what we might yet see in coming years. So thanks everyone, and thanks for the participation in the chat. It's always great to see the conversation that goes on. As my daughter says, who jumps into the chat sometimes, she says sometimes they're just like talking about something else that has nothing to do with what you guys are talking about. But that means you've built a community, right? So I don't see that as a bad thing. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.